So it looks like I can assume the responsibilities of a moderator. Thank you very much. So I'm going to be your moderator today. And on the agenda, a very interesting topic, that is the study of Russian-speaking youth. And this is a poorly researched topic, and we'll be trying to do our best. So today we are going to talk with Eva Strode, social scientist, head of the Department for Social Political Studies at the SKDS, and Iveta Kažoka, director of the Provider Center, and Anton Lysenkov, the director-in-chief of the online magazine Spectre, who is one of the authors and initiators of this research. So now I'm going to pass the ball over to Anton so he explains why this research has been carried out. Thank you, Vadim. We have to say that we have been dealing with this topic for more than a year. We started last year, and we completed our first project devoted to the research of, or the survey of a Russian-speaking community in general. And that project was completed with the support of two embassies, the Embassy of the Netherlands and Sweden, which enabled us to successfully complete it. And the main part of our work was carried out by the wonderful organization SKDS, represented by Eva Strode. And we managed to squeeze in between two COVID lockdowns to conduct a survey questioning a lot of Russian-speaking representatives. We managed to single out more than 1,100 respondents, Russian speakers of Latvia. As far as I know, this is one of the most remarkable sample over the last years. The aim of the research was to answer the following question: is there such a phenomenon as people committed to European values among Russian speakers of Latvia? Are there lots of such people? What is the segment of the society represented by them? And how their opinions on different issues, different problems can be distributed within various age groups of that Russian-speaking community. And I have to say that the results professionally collected by the SKDS were amazing. Actually, the concept of Russian-speaking Europeans has been discussed for a long time in Latvia. And there is no uniform approach to what this phenomenon is about. There was an intuitive feeling that there is such an identity, but we didn't have any data. So ours was the really first research of the kind, so that we now can speak about Russian speakers who are Europeans at the same time. How did they conduct that research? We proceeded from the human rights and the Charter of Human Rights of the European Union. Professor Rosenwald has joined us, and on the basis of those documents, we created a questionnaire, and judging from the answers to that questionnaire, that survey, you could create a profile of a person who not only considers themselves a European, but is really committed to European values, as his or her viewpoints are those of Europeans when we talk about the freedom of speech, the rule of law, the freedom for economic development, attitude towards discrimination, minorities. That is, from the very beginning, we aimed at profiling a person who would be identified as an individual committed to European values. And then there were questions shedding light on their opinions on topical questions. I would like to switch over to the theme of youth. When I familiarized myself with the research, I realized that the amount of surveyed young people was 220, and that was the sample. And a question to be addressed to Eva. So can we consider those 2020 people as a representative sample? Olga Pratsevska claims, although it is not too impressive, we can identify the trend. Well, we are talking about the representativeness. It is a proportional sample. Of course, we use different tools like face-to-face interviews at the place of residence, as well as internet surveys. So, well, that is the number we could involve. Can we talk about any error in this respect? What is the probability of error, of statistical error here? First and foremost, if we have a 1,100 sample, it means that the error wouldn't be too dramatic. Of course, we can ask whether this error can be attributed to the fact that part of the survey was conducted on the net. Why did we combine three questions together? Because it was very difficult to identify that very small group of youth. But if we start differentiating between young men and young women, then it would be difficult. That is why we decided to unite all the respondents into three groups from 18 to 31, 31 to 50, and from 51 to 75. Normally, we work with different size of samples, but that was the only way out to be able to make any conclusions. Did you carry out any similar studies concerning Russian speakers, Russian-speaking youth within your structure, SKDS? I don't really remember, because we mostly studied the whole population, Latvians and Russians together. So, what have you discovered in that research? Were there any counterintuitive findings, Iveta? There were two files I looked through, different tables created in different years, and I took them as a whole. But there were indeed some quite interesting moments. The most important things I would like to highlight, these are two things. And it is a meaningful question for the Latvian society at large. That is a question concerning the critical situations, whether people would be willing to support Latvian government. Another question about Russian behavior in Donbass. And we realized that the majority of Russian-speaking youth do not support Russian position, especially young men wouldn't support Russia in that, and it shows that for many Russian speakers, their Russian identity is very important. They associate themselves not only with Latvia, the European Union, and Russia, but it doesn't mean that they are not critical when it comes to Russian politics. And that was the first discovery. And the second discovery was the level of command of the Latvian language, where 43 plus % of the young people claim they know Latvian very well, unlike the respondents from other age groups, which testifies to considerable progress achieved by a younger generation. And at the same time, it can be associated with the answer to the question to which extent our government communicate properly with the society at large. And it means that the government mostly addresses Latvian speakers. And now, when we are faced with the problem of anti-vaccine movement, we realize that it is too optimistic to communicate officially with the whole population in Latvian, because a big segment of the Latvian society do not have an adequate command of the state language. But in light of the fact that there are quite few of such studies concerning the attitude of Russian speakers or Latvians to this or that event, can we still say that the government lacks understanding of the Russian-speaking segment of the population? Yes, we really can claim that. There are lots of stereotypes concerning Russian speakers when we look through different social opinion surveys. We'll see that the opinions differ, and the stereotype is that we have a split society and we have the same tendencies among Russian speakers as among Latvian speakers. We see a generational gap when it comes to various values. we see that more and more people use different sources of information in different languages. And when it comes to specific questions which Russian speakers would pose, and the issues Russian speakers are faced with, the state doesn't have a clear-cut understanding of their problems, because not everybody speak fluent Russian. But a big percentage of older Russian speakers exist in Russian speaking information environment, and if the authorities only listen to media in Latvian, they don't understand what's happening in the Russian-speaking community. Anton, but the greater part of your research is devoted to the generational gap. What have you discovered? What is the result of your research? First and foremost, I would like to say that the idea to have a look at the generational gap belongs to Olga Protsevska, Doctor of Communication Sciences and Strategic Consultant. She is one of the idea authors to look at the generational gap in values and viewpoints, and our present discussion is devoted to the results we have obtained after having studied groups of young people from 18 to 30, from 31 to 50, and from 51 to 75 among Russian speakers, and to see what the reactions would be to the questions posed. And here again, I would like to extend my gratitude to the Embassy of Sweden, who assisted us, who helped us, and the very gap between the youngest and two other generations, we have identified rather obvious differences on a number of issues. This youngest group of Russian speakers stands apart, and the gap is quite wide. And if we evaluate commitment to European values in general, when it comes to the whole of the Russian-speaking community, that figure would amount to 73%, according to our first research, out of which about 80% comprise young people. Among those who are not happy about the membership in NATO, the minimum percentage represents the youngest group, 15%, the middle generation, 22%, and more than 25, speaking of the older generation. And if we talk about the general level of satisfaction with the fact that Latvia is NATO member, young Russian speakers, and that is more than 45%, support Latvia's participation in the NATO organization, whereas in other groups the numbers are 35 and 25%. That is, when it comes to the main questions posed in our questionnaires, there is a glaring gap, and that is where we started noticing that younger Russian speakers are slightly different. Their attitudes are different, their values are different. And then we decided to look at the Latvian peers of that group, and we have to thank the SKDS, who considered their own archives with questionnaires where Latvian speakers were presented. And it turned out that there is a generational gap among Latvian speakers as well. But Latvian speaking youth are more reserved in their attitude towards such issues as same-sex marriage, for example. Maybe you could comment on that. Yes, will you please dwell on how the idea has come to? As Anton has already said, it's a very lengthy activity, and what we have clarified dealing with a sample of 1,000 Russian speakers, for example, we look at similar surveys of the same sample size where there would be both Russian-speaking and Latvian-speaking youth, and those groups would be very small. And that is why we decided to create larger groups. Here it is not seen, but I looked through one of the surveys concerning the European Union, and the group from 18 to 24 were practically similar between Latvian speakers and Russian speakers. But if we would add some older people, there would a difference emerge. That was also largely Olga Spratsevska's idea, because we can see that trend among Russian speakers that the youth are more open, more liberal in some questions. But what is happening among Latvians was the question we posed to ourselves, and we realized that we may register the same trends. Of course, when it comes to the membership in the European Union and NATO, the average value would be much higher, and yet the tendency is the same. Younger people are more open, elder people are more reserved in their attitudes and evaluations. But of course, there are questions where the differences between Russian speakers and Latvians are really dramatic, speaking of NATO, for example. We also had such a project, we still have it, called Barometer, where we can make projections and forecasts concerning financial situation of families. And when we conduct the research for the barometer, we see that the attitudes of young people across all ethnic spectrum is practically the same. And older Latvians, they also tend to express rather pessimistic views. That pessimism among Russian speakers may be the function of a lack of knowledge of Latvian. And financial issues are most important. No, the thing is that the young people are more optimistic concerning their financial future. But that optimism in some questions is the same among Latvians and Russian speakers. That level of optimism concerning their chances to find a good job are practically the same. Concerning double identity, you have mentioned that it is possible to be a European and yet not to denounce your Russian identity. We are exposed to some rather unfriendly rhetoric from members of the government. So, to what extent is it important for a Russian-speaking Latvian who loves the country, who loves Latvia, who has the sense of belonging to Latvia, and still insist on being Russian? How would you comment on that? Well, it is quite obvious that it is extremely important for people. They feel comfortable within the identity they choose. I don't remember whether from this year or previously. We have found that the questions concerning identity are very important, and if we look at the numbers of people who think that it is important to give an opportunity to learn in the native language, we see that the opinions would split. 78% of 78% of Russian speakers of middle age would claim that it is extremely important to them. That indicator is lower among the young people. And the importance of the information environment, whether it is Latvian or Russian or English, it is still the same trend. We see that in the Latvian-speaking environment, the young tend to speak different languages. They have joined the English-speaking information environment, and yet they have a very strong of belonging to Latvia. But their identity is still quite varied, and I agree that our state hasn't identified properly its attitude towards the identity of a big segment of the society which is associated with the Russian language and Russian culture. It is this question hasn't been evaluated by the state, whether it is good or bad. The state plays being indifferent to that topic, and that is why we have very few discussions in Russian, very poor communication with people who would say that their main identity is Russian, their main information environment, media environment is Russian. Well, they tend to be invisible for the Russian government, and we now yield the harvest. We see the result of such politics assessing the vaccination rate, because Russian-speaking residents are much less vaccinated, and not because they are anti-vaxxers, but because they are not well informed, and they are cautious. They are afraid of the consequences of vaccination. And to convince them, the information should be channeled to them in the language which they understand better. But if we create an illusion that there is no Russian-speaking information environment, if we turn a blind eye to the fact that there are segments of the population who cannot understand crucial information in Latvian, well, we may understand that the state doesn't have a position, and it is bad. Have you felt it in your research, what Iveta has been talking about, that the state doesn't want to see what the real situation is? When last year we carried out a similar discussion together with the practically same experts, we discussed our data and our findings. I remember the main discovery was that 73% of Russian speakers claimed they were committed to European values. And then we conducted a discussion and published an article in our magazine, Spectre Press. The article was entitled, "You Can't Pretend They Are Not There." But it is a very sensitive issue, painful issue, and it has been as such for many years. I remember when Latvia was joining the Eurozone, we also discussed broadly that topic, and there were materials even printed in Russian, but then there was taken a decision not to disseminate those materials explaining the transfer to a new currency in Russian. So there is a feeling that Russian language information environment hasn't been used actively enough. There are wonderful publications, wonderful periodicals in Russian, and I am now appealing to the Russian-speaking environment in Latvia. There is a cunning aspect here. It is a competitive environment, and if you don't want to address that segment of the media audience, somebody else would do that instead of you. That is the space of competition, and I think it would be reasonable to make use of that environment. You have mentioned that the research has been financed and supported by the embassies of the Netherlands and Sweden. I have been working in independent media project. I know how we work with the British, with the Nordic countries, and they say, wonderful, let's do it. But if you write a proposal for a project in Russian to a ministry, or you will not receive a benevolent answer. Latvia and our state seem not to be ready to support a Russian media environment. I don't know whether they are not interested or not, but they just know how to tackle that Russian-speaking media environment. In the 90s, at the beginning of the noughts, there were people who tried to create a stable democracy in Latvia where democracy will make identity questions irrelevant, will insist on consolidated society, knowledge of the state language, will support national cultures, minority cultures, and then that category of people who can be profiled as Russian speakers in Latvia would lose its importance for the Latvian society. And to a certain extent, that policy could yield its results in the long run, because we see that among younger people the knowledge of Latvian is much higher, and if we look at the commitment to European values, they are better perceived. But of course, everything has a price. We still have those generations which treat with utmost suspicion everything which comes from the state. And when it comes to identity issues, yes, loyalty towards Russian language has diminished among younger people, but not much less it is. And the identity questions, it's like a time bomb. So I would say that the politics waged by our state was overly optimistic. And now, during the pandemic crisis, we are faced with all these side effects, because if a great segment of your population is not informed, you can't expect that segment to believe what is being said to them in Latvian. As we see from the survey results, pensioners are not very proficient in Latvian. So these data demonstrate some illusionary optimism of those decisions the state used to take for our integrational policy, which was also based on wishful thinking. So those were illusionary visions. When you think, if you wish something if you wish for something to happen, it will happen. But it would be feasible for the state to even write a letter to the Russian-speaking elders who are presently suffering from COVID and dying in hospitals. And I would say that our state has failed to understand how to treat its Russian-speaking population. And the attitude towards Russian-speaking media is quite ambiguous. I don't think that the state would like to annihilate Russian-speaking media. They are just afraid of the answers to sensitive questions. How well is this topic studied? It is no secret that Russian media environment is in great demand among Russian speakers. Have you studied that? We have studied something, but we didn't focus on Russian speakers specifically. Every time we look at what Russian speakers think or what Latvians think, but what I wanted to say is that Latvians don't know the Russian society. If previously I would watch LTV 7 and I speak Russian, so for me it's not a problem. But if there is no such a TV channel, and if all those discussions are waged among Latvians themselves, the Russian voice cannot be heard. So that is why Latvians have no idea of what it means to be a Russian speaker in Latvia. So, they don't confuse Latvian president with Putin, but it is unclear to the authorities what Russian speakers feel. So Anton has come to Latvia and he posed that question. But we need to make special efforts for the Latvians to understand that Russian speakers are a segment of Putin audience, so that Latvians understand that Russian speakers are different. How many Russian speakers, how many Russians feel themselves European? Are there such data? No, there are no such data. Well, of course, it's one thing to call yourself a European. If there is such a discussion about the feelings, that would be really nice, because there is so much information. We are inundated with information. And I cannot follow Latvian international information and Latvian Russian speakers as well. That would be too complicated for me. So it is not surprising that the ministries confuse belonging to Russian culture and loyalty to Russia. We've got very few minutes till the end of our broadcast. If there are questions from the audience which I cannot see, you are welcome to pose them. To pose these questions to our guests. Is there anybody ready to formulate a question? I would like to specify. You can do it either writing your question in our chat where we can read it, or you can raise up your hand using the function of a raised hand, and then we will be able to give the floor to the person. So far, we haven't got any proactive members of the audience. What have I noticed working in a media environment, on TV, on the radio, YouTube? I have a feeling that a lot of Russian speakers live in so-called internal immigration. We tend to live in different worlds. And that internal immigration, when you live in Latvia, but you frequent the Russian-speaking media environment, I would be interested in how different that situation is with the Latvian speakers who speak various languages, who sit on the internet, whether it is a serious problem for the youth and the middle-age population. I wouldn't say it's a problem. The internet, mass media, social networks, that is our reality, and English has become almost a first language, and all our institutions have switched gears from Russian, perceived as a threat, to English. And there are young people who fail to express themselves in Latvian adequately, and they communicate in English. But still, the problem for Latvians is still different. The main criterion is the sense of belonging, to which social stratum you belong. And there it is quite clear our people, both Latvians and Russian speakers, associate themselves with Latvia first and foremost. Yes, Russian speakers associate themselves with Russia as well, but that sense of belonging is much weaker, which means that this sense of belonging is important but shouldn't be overestimated. And the main question for us as a joint society is how we are going to define ourselves in the nearest future, because there are different opportunities around. One possibility is to proceed along the same ways, as if not noticing Russian speakers, waiting for them to disappear in 50 or 100 years. The second possibility is to try to address the audience in two languages, Latvian and Russian as well, because the Russian segment, Russian-speaking segment, is very considerable, and to try to work with Russian speakers. And the third way is to try and find some joint identity, finding something common that can unite us, that will help us to overcome the split and polarization, and to find some means of creating a common identity. That is, the third way might be the most complicated, because it should motivate both sides to refuse their very hardliner views as to what it means to be Latvian and what it means to be Russian or Russian speaker, and to eventually come to one joint common identity. But that is more of a wish, because our present state policy over many years is just to turn a blind eye and not to pretend not to notice the existence of Russian speakers, waiting for them to gradually mold themselves into Latvians, and to wait till people stop identifying themselves as Russians, Ukrainians, or others. Anton has to conclude because time flies. Thank you, Vadim. I would like to respond to Iveta's words, whom I support. Our studies have shown that, to begin with, we need to extend hands to each other, to get acquainted, so that both the Latvian community and Russian-speaking community become familiar to each other. And it is really strange that there haven't been such studies, and with the help and support of our European friends, we are trying to bridge that gap. And there is a feeling that for Latvian speaking media, this topic is not a priority. We don't feel they are eager to to get involved, to use this information. But these are the data breaking the stereotypes, the stereotypical attitudes of two communities towards each other. So we need to use the effect of eye-opening here. I think here we can call it a day. The message is we need to get acquainted properly. But it seems to me we have broken the ice, because the very fact of such a discussion, although the audience is not vast, well, it still testifies to the fact that we have at least started making the first steps, and maybe somebody will hear something. Thank you to all participants of our discussion. I would like to thank the audience. Unfortunately, there were no questions. Hopefully, because we have clarified the topics to the utmost. Thank you very much. We'll keep in touch. And again, I would like to thank the Embassy of Sweden and Latvia, which made this discussion possible. We'll keep working on this topic, so you'll be kept in the know. Thank you very much again. Thank you.